A comedy legend collapses on stage and the audience thinks it's part of the act. That's a true story, and it's just one of 17 unbelievable final moments we're covering today. These are the comedians who passed away, leaving behind questions and shocking details you've never heard before. The first one on our list was a genius, and he knew he was leaving. 1. Bill Hicks. If you've ever heard a comedian talk about truth in comedy, they were probably talking about Bill Hicks. You see, Hicks wasn't just a comic, many people called him a philosopher with a microphone. He was huge in the United Kingdom, selling out big theaters, but back home in America, he was more of a cult hero. He was famous for his smart, angry routines about life, advertising, and big government. The thing nobody tells you is how much he truly hated selling out. Hicks was once offered a huge deal, millions of dollars, to do a commercial for a big soda company. He turned it down flat. He said it would be like a nightmare, and he couldn't live with himself. But his biggest moment of fame came from something people never even got to see. In 1993, he did a set on David Letterman's show. It was a great set, but the network got scared. They thought his jokes were too much for TV, so they cut the entire performance. It wasn't shown on air, and it broke his heart. What many overlooked was that Hicks was hiding a huge secret. He had been diagnosed with a terrible illness in his pancreas. He knew he didn't have long. He kept performing, even while he was in great pain. He passed away in 1994 when he was only 32 years old. To put it mildly, comedy lost one of its most important voices. Hicks was a comic's comic, a true original. But our next guy wasn't just a comic. He was a rock and roll screamer who lived one of the wildest lives imaginable, only to have it end in a flash of light. 2. Sam Kinison. There has never been anyone like Sam Kinison, and there will never be again. Kinison wasn't just a comedian. He was a force of nature. He came on stage like a hurricane, wearing a long trench coat and a beret, and he would just scream. He was famous for his loud, raw, and totally uncensored bits about his failed marriages and his life. Here's the wow factor. Before he was a screaming comedian, Sam Kinison was a preacher. That's right. His father was a preacher, and Sam followed in his footsteps for years before he left the church and found comedy. That's where he got his powerful voice and that fire and brimstone style. He became a massive star. He was hanging out with rock bands and even made a hit music video for the song Wild Thing that played on MTV all the time. But not all things are what they seem. Kinison had just gotten married in 1992 and was driving to a sold-out show in Nevada. He was on a desert highway, and a truck driven by a young person who was not in control swerved into his lane. The crash was terrible. Sam's life was taken almost instantly. He was only 38. The story goes that in his final moments, his brother, who was with him, heard Sam whisper, "It was a sudden, tragic end to the loudest voice in comedy." Kinison's end was sudden and shocking. But the next comedian's departure was the exact opposite. It was quiet and so baffling that it left fans scratching their heads for a long time. 3. Mitch Hedberg. Mitch Hedberg was the king of the one-liner. He had a very unique, slow, and chilled-out way of talking. He'd come on stage with sunglasses and his hair in his face, and he'd say these perfect, smart jokes. He'd say things like, "I used to do substances. I still do, but I used to too." Or, "A waffle is like a pancake with a syrup trap." He was a genius at seeing the world in a weird, funny way. What many overlooked is that Hedberg had terrible, crippling stage fright. It's wild to think about, right? A guy this famous was scared to be on stage. That's why he always wore sunglasses. He didn't want to see the audience. He would often stand with his back to the crowd or look at the floor. He just wanted to get his jokes out. He became a huge star, appearing on Letterman and having his own popular comedy albums. In 2005, fans were waiting for him to show up at a gig, but he never made it. The truth is, Mitch was found in a hotel room in New Jersey. He had passed away in his sleep. The news was a total shock to everyone. The official report said his heart just gave out. It was later found that a mix of powerful substances played a part, but his family said he had a heart condition. He was only 37 years old, and just like that, one of the most unique minds in comedy was gone. Hedberg was a master of short, perfect jokes, but our next star wasn't just a stand-up. He was the voice of everything in the 90s, and his ending is one of the darkest and most shocking in Hollywood history. 4. Phil Hartman. You might not know Phil Hartman's name, but you absolutely know his voice. He was the glue that held Saturday Night Live together for 8 seasons. He was the guy who could play anyone. He was Bill Clinton, Frank Sinatra, and 1,000 other characters. But his real fame came from The Simpsons. He was the voice of the shady lawyer Lionel Hutz and the washed-up actor Troy McClure. You'd know him from movies like Jingle All the Way and the TV show News Radio. Here's the wow factor, the thing nobody tells you. Before he was a famous actor, Phil Hartman was a successful graphic artist. He was the guy who designed the famous album cover for the band America. He also designed the logo for the band Crosby, Stills and Nash. He had a whole other secret career. He was known in Hollywood as one of the nicest, most dependable guys in the business. Everyone loved working with Phil. That's what makes his story so dark. In 1998, the world woke up to news that was impossible to believe. At his home, Phil's life was taken by his wife while he was asleep. She had been struggling with her own issues and was using a mix of substances and alcohol that night. After this terrible act, she locked herself in a room and a few hours later took her own life. The police were there, trying to get her out, but it was too late. Phil Hartman was 49, and comedy lost a true legend in the worst way possible. Phil's loss was a true shock that nobody saw coming. But the next comedian's passing was just as sudden, cutting short a career that was exploding and leaving an entire comedy community in disbelief. 5. Patrice O'Neal. Patrice O'Neal was your favorite comedian's favorite comedian. He wasn't a household name like some others, but in the comedy world, he was a giant. He was known for his completely honest and often shocking comedy. He would go on stage and just talk. He'd talk about relationships between men and women in a way that was so raw and real, it made people uncomfortable in the best way. He was a regular on the Opie and Anthony radio show and was famous for his appearances on the Comedy Central roasts. The thing nobody tells you about Patrice is that he was a true philosopher. He had this idea called Black Phillip, where he would give brutal, honest advice. He believed in being 100% yourself, no matter what. He was also a huge man, and he knew he had health problems. He was diabetic, but he openly talked about how he didn't like to take care of himself. He loved bad food and hated exercise. He made jokes about it, but under the surface, it was a serious problem. In October 2011, he was at home when he suffered a massive stroke. It was all related to his diabetes and high blood pressure. He was rushed to the hospital, but he couldn't speak or move. He held on for over a month, but he never recovered. He passed away in November at just 41 years old. He was just about to become a massive star, and then he was gone. Patrice was all about honesty, but our next comic was famous for a different kind of honesty, the brutal kind. He was the king of the roast, and his final days were a private struggle he hid from the cameras. 6. Greg Giraldo. If you ever watched a Comedy Central roast, you know Greg Giraldo. He was the roast master general. He was the guy who would go up to the microphone and just destroy every other celebrity on the stage with a smile. His jokes were smart, fast, and incredibly mean, and people loved him for it. He was a regular guest on all the late-night shows and a headlining comedian all over the country. But here's the wow factor, and it's a big one. Greg Giraldo was a genius. And that's not just an opinion. He went to Columbia University and then graduated from Harvard Law School. That's right, he was a lawyer. He passed the bar exam and worked for a huge, powerful law firm in New York City. But, to put it mildly, he hated it. He said it was boring and soulless. So, he gave up a six-figure job to tell jokes in dark clubs for almost no money. What many overlooked was that Greg had his own personal demons. He spoke about his struggles with alcohol and other substances in his act. He had been in and out of recovery programs. In 2010, he was in a hotel in New Jersey, getting ready for a show. He was found in his room after an accidental combination of his prescription medications. He was rushed to the hospital and put on life support, but he passed away 4 days later. He was 44 years old. Giraldo was a genius who left the law for laughs. Our next comic was the opposite. He was a clean, family-friendly dad on TV, but his real-life stand-up was famously not for kids. His passing left the whole world asking, how? 7. Bob Saget. For an entire generation, Bob Saget was America's dad. He was the clean-cut, caring father Danny Tanner on the huge hit show Full House. He was also the friendly host of America's Funniest Home Videos, making silly voices over clips of people falling down. He was a symbol of wholesome family entertainment. But here is the kicker. The real Bob Saget, the stand-up comedian, was the exact opposite. His comedy act was famously one of the dirtiest and most shocking you could ever see. He loved telling the most messed-up jokes possible. This contrast between his TV persona and his real comedy was a huge wow factor for fans. He loved shocking the audience. In January 2022, the world got news that made no sense. Bob Saget was on a brand new, sold-out comedy tour. He had just done a 2-hour show in Florida and posted online about how happy he was. He went back to his hotel room, and that was the last anyone heard from him. He was found the next day in his room. He had passed away. But how? The truth was stranger than anyone could guess. He had a simple fall. He must have hit the back of his head on something, maybe the headboard of the bed. He didn't think it was a big deal. He just went to sleep. But the blow to his head was incredibly serious, and it caused a massive internal problem. He passed away in his sleep at 65. Saget's passing was a 1 in a million accident. But the next comedian's departure was caused by something just as rare, a hidden genetic problem that he battled his entire life, right alongside his iconic screeching voice. 8. Gilbert Gottfried. There was only one Gilbert Gottfried. You knew him the second you heard him. That loud, screeching, squinty-eyed performance was one of the most famous in all of entertainment. He was the voice of the parrot Iago in Disney's Aladdin. He was the Aflac duck for years, screaming that one word in commercials. He was also a fearless and shocking stand-up comedian, famous for telling jokes that nobody else would dare to. But not all things are what they seem. The Gilbert you saw on stage was a character. The real Gilbert, the thing nobody tells you, was a quiet, shy, and gentle family man. He was known as one of the kindest people in the comedy world, but he was also hiding a huge secret from the public. He had a very rare genetic disorder. It was a muscular disease that he had been living with for a long time. It made his muscles weak and caused heart problems. This illness was a private battle. In April 2022, just a few months after his friend Bob Saget passed, Gilbert's family announced that he was gone. He was 67. His heart had finally given out due to complications from this long-term genetic problem. It was another giant shock to the comedy world. Two legends were gone in just a few months. Gilbert hid his pain behind a legendary voice. Our next comedian was also a master of disguise, a true chameleon who could become anyone, but his real-life end was a tragedy that started right on stage. 9. John Belushi. Before there was Saturday Night Live as we know it, there was John Belushi. He was the show's first true breakout star. He was a ball of pure chaotic energy. He was the samurai, the cheeseburger guy from the Olympia Cafe, and half of the legendary Blues Brothers. He starred in Animal House, which became one of the biggest comedy movies of all time. Here's the wow factor. In 1978, John Belushi was the king of the world. In one single week, Saturday Night Live was the #1 show on TV. Animal House was the #1 movie in America. And the Blues Brothers album, Briefcase Full of Blues, was the #1 album on the charts. No one had ever done that before. He was a true rock star of comedy. But, to put it mildly, he lived like a rock star too. He was famous for his hard-living lifestyle and for pushing things to the limit. His body just couldn't keep up. In March 1982, he was staying at the famous Chateau Marmont Hotel in Hollywood. After a long night of heavy partying, he was given a powerful and dangerous mix of substances. He was found the next day. He had passed away at only 33 years old. Comedy lost one of its brightest, wildest stars, and it left a huge hole in the heart of SNL. Belushi lived fast and left a huge hole in comedy. Our next legend also lived a fast-paced life, breaking barriers for women in comedy. But her end came not from a wild lifestyle, but from a routine checkup. 10. Joan Rivers. Joan Rivers was a pioneer. She was a woman in the 1960s trying to make it in the tough, male-dominated world of stand-up comedy. And she didn't just make it, she took it over. She was famous for her sharp, mean, and hilarious jokes. Her catchphrase was, "Can we talk?" And she would say the most shocking things about celebrities and herself. She was a regular on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson and became a global superstar. The thing nobody tells you is what a trailblazer she was. In 1986, she became the first and only woman to ever host her own late-night network talk show, The Late Show, starring Joan Rivers. This was a huge deal, but it came at a price. She was competing against her mentor, Johnny Carson. He felt so betrayed that he never spoke to her again. The show didn't last long, but she cemented her place in history. She reinvented herself decades later as the queen of the Uria. Red carpet, a star on Fashion Police. She was 81 years old and still working harder than people half her age. In 2014, she went in for what was supposed to be a simple, routine procedure on her throat. It was a checkup at a clinic. But during the procedure, something went terribly wrong. Her breathing stopped. She was rushed to the hospital and put into a medical coma, but she never woke up. She passed away a week later. The Queen of Comedy was gone, not from old age, but from a tragic medical complication. Joan's departure was a medical shock. But the next comedian's passing was a long, private battle he hid from everyone. He was a master of the deadpan, and his secret was as poker-faced as he was. 11. Norm Macdonald. Norm Macdonald was a comedian unlike any other. He was famous for his deadpan delivery. He would tell these long, winding, shaggy dog stories that seemed to go nowhere. But the journey was the funniest part. He was most famous as the anchor for Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live in the mid-90s. He was known for his edgy jokes, especially his constant ribbing of O.J. Simpson, which many people say got him fired from the job. But here's the kicker, the ultimate wow factor that no one knew. For 9 years, Norm was fighting a private battle with a serious blood illness. 9 years. And he told almost no one. He didn't want people to feel sorry for him. He didn't want it to change how people saw his comedy. He just kept working, kept touring, and kept being the same old Norm. What many overlooked was that he knew his time might be running out. During the 2020 lockdown, he was at home, and his health was getting worse. So, he set up a camera in his living room, all by himself, and he performed his new hour of comedy. He wanted to make sure his final set was recorded, just in case. It was released after his passing as nothing special. In September 2021, the world was stunned to learn that Norm Macdonald was gone at 61. He had kept his fight a secret until the very end. Norm's privacy was legendary. But our next comic was the opposite, a loud, musical, and joyfully weird man whose catchphrase defined 80s comedy. His ending, however, was quiet and lonely. 12. Kevin Meaney. If you were watching comedy in the 1980s, you knew Kevin Meaney. He was this burst of frantic, weird energy. He'd come on stage in a tight suit, sweating and yelling, "That's not right." That became his huge catchphrase. He was also famous for his funny song, "We're Big Fans," where he'd play the guitar and sing about his mom. He was on The Tonight Show, he had his own HBO specials, and he was everywhere. The thing nobody tells you is that Kevin was also a very talented actor. He wasn't just a stand-up. He starred on Broadway in the huge hit musical Hairspray, playing the role of Edna Turnblad. He was a multi-talented guy. Later in his life, he also made a brave personal decision. After being married and having a daughter, he came out as gay. This was a big deal for a comedian of his generation, and he was embraced for his honesty. But by the 2010s, his star wasn't shining as bright. He was still touring, but he wasn't the huge name he had been. In October 2016, his family and friends got worried when they couldn't reach him. He was found at his home in New York. He had passed away all alone. The cause was a heart issue. He was 60 years old. It was a sad, quiet end for a man who had brought so much loud, frantic joy to so many people. Kevin Meaney brought frantic energy to the stage. Our next comedian also had huge energy, but he focused it all on one topic: food. He was a giant of comedy in every way, but his body just couldn't keep up. 13. John Pinette. John Pinette was a comedian who people just adored. He was a big guy with a big, friendly personality, and his comedy was all about the things everyone loves, mostly food. He was famous for his amazing routines about buffets, Italian restaurants, and his attempts at dieting. His most famous bit was his "You Go Now" impression, or his "Get Out of the Line" routine about the bread at a buffet. He was a clean comic, so families could watch him together. Here's the wow factor. A lot of people might not remember, but John Pinette was in the final most-watched episode of Seinfeld. He played the man who gets his car taken from him by the main cast, who then just stand by and make fun of him, which is the incident that lands them all in jail. It's a key part of TV history. What many overlooked was that John was in a constant, painful battle with his health. He weighed over 450 pounds at his heaviest, and it caused a lot of problems. He worked hard, and at one point lost over 200 pounds. But he was also dealing with a dependency on prescription helpers for the pain in his back and joints. In 2014, he was in a hotel room in Pittsburgh. He had actually checked into a facility to get help, but his system was just worn out. He passed away from liver and heart issues. He was only 50 years old. John's health struggles were visible, but our next comedian's struggles were all on the inside. He was a young genius writer for hit shows, and his tragic end serves as a dark warning. 14. Harris Wittels. You might not know the name Harris Wittels, but you 100% know his work. He was a young comedy genius. He was a writer and producer on the beloved show Parks and Recreation. He was the guy who invented the word humble brag. He even wrote a book about it. He was also a hilarious comedian in his own right, appearing on podcasts like Comedy Bang Bang, where he had a recurring bit called Harris's Phone Corner. He was smart, weird, and incredibly funny. The thing nobody tells you is that Harris was living a double life. On the surface, he was a super successful, happy-go-lucky writer. But in private, he was in a deep, dark battle with a dependency on powerful substances. He was very open about it on podcasts. He would talk about his trips to recovery centers with a mix of humor and sadness. He had been clean for a while and was trying to get his life back on track. But in February 2010, the comedy world was shattered. Harris was found at his home. He had suffered a tragic, accidental relapse. He had taken a powerful illegal substance, and his body just couldn't handle it. He was only 30 years old. Tributes poured in from all the stars he worked with, like Amy Poehler and Aziz Ansari. It was a devastating loss of a brilliant mind that was just getting started. Harris was a young star just getting started. Our next comedian was a legend who had been on TV for decades, a true pioneer of the talk show format. His passing was also a long, hidden fight. 15. David Brenner. For decades, if you wanted to make it in comedy, you had to go through The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And nobody went on that show more than David Brenner. He was the king of observational comedy. He was the guy who would notice the small, weird things in life and turn them into comedy gold. He holds the record for the most guest appearances on The Tonight Show, a massive 158 times. He even guest hosted the show 75 times. Here's the wow factor. Before he was a comedian, David Brenner was a very successful TV producer and documentary filmmaker. He was winning awards and making good money, but he had a dream of being a stand-up. He took a huge leap of faith, quit his job, and started at the very bottom. His father told him he was crazy, but Brenner became one of the biggest comedy stars of the 70s and 80s. He continued to tour and perform for his entire life, but in the early 2010s, he got some terrible news. He was diagnosed with a very aggressive illness, and just like Norm Macdonald, he decided to keep it almost completely private. He didn't want a big, sad farewell tour. He just wanted to be with his family. In March 2014, he passed away at his home in New York City, surrounded by his loved ones. He was 78. He was a true legend who helped invent the style of comedy we still see today. Brenner was a talk show king, but our next comedian's most famous appearance was his last. And it happened live, on television, while 1 million people watched, thinking it was a joke. 16. Tommy Cooper. In the United Kingdom, Tommy Cooper was more than a comedian. He was a national treasure. He was a giant of a man, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall, and he was famous for wearing a red fez hat. His whole act was magic. But here's the kicker. His act was that he was a terrible magician. He would mess up every trick. He'd say, "just like that," and the trick would fail. The audience would be in tears from laughing. The thing nobody tells you is that Tommy Cooper was actually a brilliant magician. He was a member of the famous Magic Circle, a private club for the best magicians in the world. It took a true genius to know how to perform a magic trick perfectly wrong. He was one of the most beloved and highest-paid stars in Britain for decades in April 1984. He was performing on a hugely popular TV show called Live from Her Majesty's. It was being broadcast live to millions of people. In the middle of his act, he suddenly collapsed and fell backward against the curtain. The audience roared with laughter. They thought it was part of the act. They thought it was his final, funniest, failed trick. But it wasn't a joke. Tommy Cooper had suffered a massive heart attack. The show cut to a commercial. Backstage, they tried to help him, but it was too late. He passed away right there on the stage. Tommy Cooper's end is one of the most unbelievable in show business. Our next star also had a famous TV show, but his private life and health struggles were a closely guarded secret. 17. Garry Shandling. Garry Shandling changed television. He was a meta genius, a comedian who made shows about shows. His first hit was It's Garry Shandling's Show, where he would talk directly to the audience and make fun of the fact that he was in a sitcom. But his masterpiece was The Larry Sanders Show on HBO. It was a show about a high-strung, needy late-night talk show host. It was so real and so funny, it influenced every single comedy show that came after it. What many overlooked is that Garry was a true comedy mentor. He was like a big brother to a whole generation of comics like Judd Apatow, Sarah Silverman, and many more. He was also a very spiritual person. He practiced Buddhism and was known to be a deep, thoughtful, and private man. But he had a secret health battle. Years before, he had a health scare and was diagnosed with a condition that could cause problems with his blood. In March 2016, he was at his home in Los Angeles. He suddenly felt strange and called 911 himself, saying he couldn't breathe. While he was on the phone with the operator, he collapsed. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but they couldn't save him. A massive blood clot had traveled from his leg to his heart. He was 66, and his passing was a total shock to all of his friends and fans.